Hey everyone, welcome to this video tutorial where we're going to look at making a flipped classroom resource. So if we're thinking about this course, one of the areas that we've been looking at is media and modality, and really the importance of engaging learners through the use of very carefully put together media. So what does that mean? That means we really need to think about what we're creating for students, particularly when we start to use video as a tool. And the flipped classroom is really a strong reflection of that. You might have heard this term flipped classroom being used in the last few years. If you just Google the term, it means a flipped classroom is an instructional strategy and a type of blended learning that reverses the traditional learning environment by delivering instructional content, often online, outside of the classroom. It moves activities, including those that may have been traditionally considered homework, into the classroom. So if we think about our classrooms, we've often spent a lot of time simply instructing students. Some might say lecturing, and if we take a lot of that lecturing content and we put it into a video and share that with our students, it then potentially frees up classroom time for more interaction. If you look at some of these images here, they demonstrate this. So for example, this image that shows that students prepare to participate in class activities before, and you can see if you look at this, there's a little icon of a teacher essentially presenting some content, and then in the classroom students practice applying key concepts with feedback, and then after, students check understanding and extend their learning. So it's really trying to free up that classroom time to have more interaction and perhaps a bit less lecturing. So I guess that means that we need to think about how we put together the kind of content that we do want to directly instruct students in a video. And to do that, let's just take a review of this week's lecture that we've been looking at. And if we look at some of the multimedia and associated effects, we can see that Maya who'd done a lot of work in this, defining multimedia as presenting both words and pictures together, and there's extensive research on the different effects, including multimedia, modality, redundancy, split attention, signaling, personalization. And we showed you at the end of the lecture why these things are important and what you needed to do about these things. We saw here that they had a huge effect on learning, particularly the use of multimedia. That's a huge effect size. So when it's done really, really well, it affects learning. And even personalization is really, really important. Split attention is very important. And so what do we need to do? Well, we revealed that in slide 11, where we talked about the major decision points for each of these effects. So things like presenting both words and pictures, using spoken narration rather than written narration, do not include repetitive or irrelevant information, presenting related pieces of information in close proximity, directing attention to relevant parts of the material, and then using a conversational rather than more formal style of instruction. So these are kind of the most important things to have at the forefront of our minds when we create content for our students. What other things are going to help us when we're planning? Well, one of the things that is particularly helpful is to think about the content that we're presenting to students as really a kind of a story, right? Stories can be quite powerful, and when we present important content, if we can package it as a story, students can really understand what we're trying to present more effectively. And so a lot of people that have looked at media use have also looked at the metaphor of the story as the way that we present media, and some of the most effective ways of doing that. And one of the most effective ways I have found is using this technique called the two-column story table. I'm going to bring that up as a Google search just to show you. And if you just Google search for two-column story table. Now, the key thing there is that it's not a storyboard. You may have heard the term storyboard before, and this is very different to that. I'm going to show you. The person that we're looking at here is Jason Ola, and from his website, which is www.jasonola.com, he has a PDF file that's freely downloadable called Using the Two-Column Story Table Approach. I'm just going to open this just to show you. Now this is, you can read this, it's a very quick read, but the essence of this is that it's a departure from the traditional storyboard approach, or sometimes called the story map. Now, the storyboard approach is basically a simple division of a page into squares, and the story is simply then told through essentially text and images. A story table is a bit different to that. It's using a two-column approach, and it's built into two phases. And basically, the phase one, which I'm just highlighting here, you put the narrative and the media descriptions in separate columns, and then you have essentially a script that's to be spoken, and then you've got the idea of media that you want to find to demonstrate that the points that you're making in the script. And then phase two is getting the media to accompany the citation information and putting that into the table. I'm just going to show you, because he's got an example of this, and if we have a look at it, you can see this is a simple story, and it's a conventional narrative too. So we've got here, once upon a time there was a student who wanted to tell a digital story, but she just didn't know what to talk about. She wondered a lot what would be the most interesting thing to her audience. That night at dinner, she asked her parents if they had any good stories. They told her about her grandparents and her early days as a baby, very embarrassing, and on and on. Still, it wasn't what she was looking for, so she went to see a psychic. Okay, so you can see here that's the story, and then over on the right hand side we've got the images. This is essentially the media that we'd be looking for in order to convey this story. So straight up, we've got a potentially good multimedia effect going on here, because if we pick our images wisely, we've then got a clear narrative. If we can use the digital tool to record the audio, we can also have spoken narrative, as well as potentially subtitles if we needed to have a really good, strong effect, and essentially really do what we're trying to do here with multimedia. Now, if you go to the next little bit of it, they show you essentially what we'd be looking for. So you can see here the images are now pasted in with the student, and then the image of the family dinner. So you can see here that we're starting to get a sense of how this story is going to look. Now, it's at this point that we would then be going to source images. And generally speaking, if we're going to source our images appropriately, we need to pay some attention to copyright, because copyright is something that we want to teach our students. It is very important, and ideally we want our students to adhere to various copyright legislation, be that national or international. Now, in Australia, and I know in much of the world, to source images and ensure that we've got permission to use those images, we tend to go to websites that have some Creative Commons component to them. Now, Creative Commons, if you haven't looked at it before, is simply a website that exists to support copyright and to support permission for using media on the internet. It's a very important website, and for artists, it enables artists to basically share content like photos and the like, and to establish levels of permission as part of that. So if you, for example, create an image and you put that image on Flickr, one of the things that you can do is then tag that image with Creative Commons and say anyone is free to use this image. So it's a fantastic way when we're looking for media to make sure that we have permission to use it. Now, there's a search website basically built into Creative Commons, which is actually just search.creativecommons.org. So if I was looking for an image like dinner table, for example, I can do a search for that, and up come all these images that I can use. Now the thing about these images, if I click this, it takes me to a Flickr page, and I can basically grab this, and it's an image by this person, and it's licensed for free use. So if I can just basically take that that link, and if I go to that link just to show you, this is the Flickr page. There's the particular author of that image, and so when I download that image, as I can do, and I can right click and save the image, and I'll call it dinner table. And what I can actually do as I save that, just to show you, is to grab that, copy that, and then save the image with the person's name by, and I can then type in Flickr. And what that will do is it'll save the image. I'm going to put it on my desktop, and I've got the person's name in there. So when I create this particular resource, I can attribute that person. So if I'm using this in a PowerPoint presentation, for example, I can attribute that person. Okay, and so that's really important when we're using other people's media as part of our own, that we follow the steps of basically sourcing the image correctly and then using it correctly. There are other ways, so just to show you one other way, Google Images, and when you go to images.google.com, and when you do a search for dinner table, now you can go to Tools, and then you can change this one from usage rights to labeled for reuse, and you get essentially the same thing. All these images I can freely use as long as I find out who the author is and as long as I attribute them. So it's really important that as we're sourcing other people's media, we follow the steps for good digital citizenship and copyright. And this basically brings us now to the last part of the video demonstration, where we look at what are some tools that we can use to create a good quality flipped resource. Well, basically there's a combination of tools that are available for that purpose, and ones that you're probably already familiar with. So the first one that you can explore is simply PowerPoint itself. So if we look at this, I've got a lecture here sitting in PowerPoint, and I can use that very tool to basically add extra media. So for example, this one.
Still not sure which approach is the right one? In this slide, you'll find a summary of the best approaches to follow based on Mayer's research. You can see, for example, that it's always a good idea to include both words and pictures, use spoken narration in addition to pictures where possible, avoid repetitive information.
Okay, and you can see that what we've done here is to simply record audio within that PowerPoint resource. So PowerPoint is really good like that, and you can now add those resources simply just using the insert menu, and you can see you can add video, and you can record video on my PC, or I can record audio. So PowerPoint itself is a really powerful tool for adding other media in. The other thing that you can do with the latest version of PowerPoint is you can export your PowerPoint file as a video. So if you're looking to create a good quality flipped video resource, you can go File, and then you can go Export, and you can choose Create a Video. And by doing that, it will take all the audio that you've recorded, and then that audio will be playing at the same time as that slide is displayed, and then that gets exported as a video. So PowerPoint is probably one of the simplest and best tools you can use for creating your flipped resource. But it's by no means not the only one. There are other tools that are really, really good. For example, the tool that I'm using right now to record my desktop and record my voice, and that tool is Open Broadcaster Studio. So I'm going to show you that tool just in a Chrome tab here, and it's abbreviated to OBS, sometimes OBS Studio, and it's a free downloadable tool. It's open source, so it's freely downloadable, and it runs on all the major platforms. And basically it allows you to record your whole desktop and set up your microphone, and it records everything that you're doing. So at the moment, as I switch from one application to the other, it's recording everything that I'm doing and everything that I'm saying. So this is fantastic if you want to demonstrate something on your computer, and if you set up all the right steps of having all the right content displayed, and you've got all your written content and you're narrating that. This is a fantastic tool for doing that. This is obviously a very sophisticated tool. There are other tools that are easier to use. So one other tool that I want to mention is called Screencastify. So Screencast and then Ify. Now this is an extension that simply runs in Google Chrome. So I'm just going to click that, and it's a really, really simple one. If you're using a browser, Screencastify will simply record whatever you do in that browser, including if you switch tabs or if you type things in, if you scroll down, all of these things get recorded, and it will also record a microphone. And if you'd like, you can enable a webcam as well, and then it will record your camera so that you can see you speaking at the same time. This is perfect if you want to demonstrate something using a browser. I should point out that Screencastify has a free version and a paid version, and at the time of releasing this video, the free version is limited to 10 minutes. So if you're just doing a quick screencast for your flipped resource, Screencastify is a really good one to use. And if it's less than 10 minutes, it will be free. Beyond that, you have to look at paying for it. Open Broadcaster's software is actually free and completely unlimited in what you can do with it. So if you probably, if you're looking at doing something a bit more complicated, I'd recommend OBS. If you're looking at doing something very simple and quick, I recommend Screencastify. If you're used to working with PowerPoint and you just simply want to turn a great PowerPoint presentation into a video with audio that has all of these elements in there, follows all the steps around redundancy, split attention signaling, etc., and you're used to working with PowerPoint, I highly recommend PowerPoint. Don't forget though that tools like the 2-column story table can be really good when you're just trying to plan what's going to be in my resource. What kind of a story am I telling to my students in this flipped resource when I'm demonstrating something, for example? How does that work as a story? So sometimes thinking about it as a story can be really powerful. Don't forget as well that if you go back to slide 11, there are things that we really want to try to do in our resource. So all these things that are mentioned here in this final slide. And you might actually give yourself a score when you've created your resource to how well did I go? Did I present both words and pictures, for example? Did I direct attention to relevant parts? Did I present related pieces close together? Was it personalized, and so on? So you can evaluate yourself, or you can ask a colleague to evaluate your resource using, again, this list. So I hope you found this this little demonstration helpful, particularly as you're demonstrating and creating a really high quality flipped resource for your students.